we'll be talking about AWS relational databases. And that's because before now, we've actually seen storage, right? We've seen storage. We've seen how EBS, instant store, we've talked about EFS, and we've talked about S3, right? But again, those kind of storage, they have their limitations. And as we are going to see, I mean, it's not everything you can model with an EBS volume. Neither is it everything you can model with S3, right? That's why database is coming, right? There are different kinds of databases, whether it's relational, whether it's analytics, but a database is really a database. It gives you more or less like, it gives you more structure than what a file system will give you, which is what we've seen in the past, right? So let me go to the next slide. So we're going to grasp the concept of relational databases, right? And SQL as a whole. And then we'll also see how RDS tries to solve it, right? Like I said, RDS means relational database service. So it's a database service from AWS to give you relational database, right? It's not like it's new. There has always been relational database, but now AWS is willing, they have it, they can provide it for you, and take some of those management overhead from you. Okay, so we'll see the benefits of Aurora, right, and how it differs from RDS itself, and then we'll look at multi-AZ deployments. We would also look at how you can save costs, because once you have your database running in the cloud, one of the things people think about is that how can you bring costs down, right? And we'll just look briefly at some of the options that we have available. Okay. So what is the challenge? So if you look at EFS, EBS, Instant Store, S3 that we've looked at, right? You see that they have their limitation, right? Because there is no order. That's one thing you don't get with just storing things in your file or storing things in disk, right? There is sometimes you want to enforce some constraints or put some order in place. You can't do all that with the relational data, with like the storage we've seen, right? So which is where database comes in. The fact that structured storage, right, with relationships, because that's how as time goes on, you see that if there is an entity called a human, maybe you're trying to model like a classroom, for example, and there are people in there, right? That's where you start seeing relationship. You start seeing students, you start seeing which class they belong to, which school they belong to. You can model all those kind of relationship. You can't do all that just using the types of files we have seen in the past. Okay. And also, when you think about it, also when you think about searching as a problem, right? There are times where you have so many millions of records, and you're just looking for one record out of those millions of records. In those kind of cases, the volumes we've seen and the files we've seen, they won't scale, right? So that's one thing the databases does for you. And again, most of the databases we're going to be seeing, some of them are optimized, most of them are actually optimized for specific purposes, right? So that's why there is like a database for what you want to achieve, not one database fits all. People have reasons, specific reasons why they pick a certain database over the other. And then obviously we're in AWS. AWS offers managed databases to actually reduce that operational overhead. And that's the whole reason for my introduction. The fact that databases have been there before the cloud. But what does the cloud do? What does the cloud do differently? They give you that database and they basically manage the overhead for you. And then you are just interested in really running data, using the database basically, and then paying as you use, right? Cool. So it's still more or less like the same model we've been using since we started talking about this subject. So what is a relational database? For some people this is new, but for some people I believe this is also not new. But it's just as it says, right? Relational, meaning there is like a relationship. First of all, the data is organized in tables. That's one thing that is unique about relational database. But again, secondly, there's really relationship, right? So I gave a simple example there. You have like a user. And again, from the beginning, we also talked about the fact that most of us here on this call are users, but we want to also be builders, right? Because for most of us, we go to like some applications, we put in our address, we put in our user, we put in our zip code. All that is not just taken and dumped somewhere. Basically, when you fill in those information, it goes into its data store and relationship is kept. And it is easy for them to know if they retrieve my record, it's easy for them to see where am I living, what is my zip code, because there's like a relationship, right? So first of all, there are tables, and then there's like a relationship that links all the entities that you have. So entities like address, user, zip code, right? And then one famous is SQL, right? Known for you can use SQL to basically query that data, right? Structured query language. So you can use it to query a relational database, basically, and just bring everything together. So if you were to think of a language to query a relational database, SQL is the word, right? And then really structured schema. That's one thing you should remember. Always remember a relational database for being structured, something that follows a structure. So when you start hearing things like constraints, you start hearing things like where you have to do foreign keys, relationships, and all that. You're more or less like you're setting out a contract there and like a structure that the database has to follow. Okay, so relational has to do with structure. And at some point, you see how some other databases try to solve that, right? Without, they just ignore the structure and let you do your thing. Cool. So for some of us, we've written SQL in the past. I don't do a lot of SQL again, but SQL is basically easy. Once you have the tables, you have the relationship, all together. It's just very easy for you to do joins, whether it's left join, whatever join you're doing, just to what concatenate data together, right? So because if you think about it, I told you of an address. So if I really wanted to fetch a user, I would say I need this user's first name, I need his last name, blah blah blah. I need all this entity from the user, but I also want to get the person's address and get the person's zip code, right? And that's where the relationship comes in, because you've already arranged, the relationship is there. And now you're trying to more or less like join all these entities together to retrieve record, whatever record you want, right? So, and there will be inserts, right? Sometimes you need to enter in the data. Sometimes you need to also update the data, and then sometimes you need to delete, right? So I think people usually call it CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete. So it's just the fact that, yeah, you can perform those operations on a relational database. Cool. And then there is really the concept of indexes, the fact that you can have indexes on some attributes of your data to make querying faster. If I know a particular field will be used for searching, I would index those fields so that when I'm searching them, they are organized in such a way that it's easy for me to retrieve them. Okay, so this is really one of the key things you need to understand about relational databases. I can as well just take you straight to relational database, but it's good I said this foundation, right? Because that's really what distinguishes relational database from the other database we are going to be seeing as time goes on. Okay, so take note of it. Like I said, you will not be you won't be doing a lot of database. You won't even be doing for the most part, right? But it's good you understand how it works and how it relates to you. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So let's now look at RDS. So it's called Relational Database Service, right, from AWS. So what is it? Relational database was there before AWS, right? So the thing is that if I need the same relational database that I've just talked about and I wanted it in the cloud, that's RDS, right? So it means if I wanted to host a relational database in the cloud, AWS has that service given to me in the form of RDS. It's called Relational Database Service, right? And the beauty of it is that whether you have, like I said, relational databases, there are different types, right? Some is Postgres, some is MySQL, some is, Oracle. But the thing is that they are relational database. And the beauty of the cloud is just the fact that you can get all those different types of engines, right? So regardless of the engine you're using, you're covered in the cloud, right? And again, automated provisioning and management, because the overhead is really some of the benefits we've seen in a lot of the services we've played with already, right? The overhead is taken away from you. You are just basically getting a data store, putting your data, and just doing the part that you need to do. Like we've also seen the shared model, right, where AWS is responsible for some things, you are also responsible for something. So it doesn't mean that AWS is just going to do everything for you, but for the most part, they do a lot of the things for you, right? So provisioning and the management itself, they can do all that, many of those things for you, right? High availability and scalability is one of the beautiful things we've seen why people move to the cloud. So in the on-premise or traditionally, if you had like a database, you know that if that database is growing over time, you have to start thinking about the compute where the database is running. You have to think about the storage. There's so many things to be thinking about. But here, the cloud is doing all that for you. Automated backups is one of the things you get. Point-in-time recovery is also something you get. Okay, backups. Point-in-time recovery is just a concept that tells you that you can retrieve record per time, right? You can say I want to go back to what my database was yesterday, right? All that. I know even before the cloud, people can do it, but the cloud makes it easy. Okay, and we'll see all that. So when you look at what are the engines supported today, and this thing is really helpful for you to understand that it's really helpful for you to know, first of all, what are the engines for relational database, and those are the engines that are put here, right? Because if you ever see a question or you're dealing with as you grow in your journey, you should know all these are really relational database. They are, but remember that not all companies will use all of them at once, right? Some people use Aurora. Some people, for me, Postgres, MySQL are really the most popular that I've seen. But some people use, Oracle. Some people use my Microsoft SQL Server. They are all relational database. That's just what you need to take out, right? So it now depends on which one you want to host. So these are the engines that are supported. So MySQL is supported, Postgres, MariaDB, Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, IBM DB2, Aurora, right? And we'll see what Aurora means on its own. Okay, so I don't need to stress around that. So there's also something I wanted to introduce you to. So the way our EC2 instances are, right? We've seen EC2 instances and we've used them in the past. So with EC2 instances, the way they are, you can actually get an EC2 instance, right, that has an EBS volume, right, and then install your own database. if you wanted to manage yours, right? So there is no more or less like one rule fit all. If you choose to get compute from the cloud, you can actually get compute from AWS and choose to put your own database. So you install whatever database you want to install in the machine, right? We saw user boot script and all that. You can use all that, set up the database, and then let whoever wants to connect to the database connect, right? There'll be username, there'll be password, there'll be credentials to connect into the database. So, but when you see that option, that's a self-managed option usually. And if you're already in the cloud, it is discouraged, right? And there's no cloud company that I've worked for before that is in AWS that want to get an EC2 instance and install their database in, right? But if you were just starting, maybe you were just doing like your own research or something you wanted to play, yeah, you can go that route. But again, here I'm trying to show you the difference, right? One is really self-managed. So if you look at an EC2, if you put MySQL inside of it, it's self-managed, manual configuration. You have to decide when you do your backups and all that. Patching is manual. Scaling is going to be complex because you're thinking about it ground up, right? High availability, you have to set it up if you want to get high availability, right? And then SSH access, obviously, you have to, yeah, like I said, it's just your machine. You can SSH into the machine and do whatever you want to do. On the flip side, that is what RDS takes away from you, right? It is obviously powered by an EC2 instance. There's like an EBS volume that is, that your data is being stored, right? But all that whole SSH, you having to go into the machine, you don't need all that. You're just basically relating to your database as a service, right? So RDS is fully managed by AWS. Backups are automated. You just set a schedule and it works automatically, right? Patching is also automated. AWS will patch it for you without you doing anything, right? You can scale up, right? Because when you set up an RDS instance, for example, you can choose and then you can go up. And I think we've discussed scaling extensively, right? Scaling vertical, you go up, right? And then if you needed maybe more replicas, you can scale horizontally, right? But all that is, you can do that just easily compared to if you were to do like your own self-managed EC2 instance, okay? Built-in multi-AZ, absolutely. And then you don't have direct access to whatever EC2 machine is powering the relational database. That's the difference you need to see. So like I said, most people don't do it, the option on the right, but it's there. The cloud will not force you. The option is still there if you want to go that route, okay? But it's good you use this to build the foundation. So what are the benefits of RDS? If you look at it, automated provisioning, OS patching is there, continuous backups with point-in-time recovery if you wanted. One beautiful thing we're also going to see is that there's like dashboard, CloudWatch integration for you to see if you are, how you're utilizing the resources you have, right? Read replicas, you're going to see that what that does. Multi-AZ setup for disaster recovery. Take note, multi-AZ is not for speed. It's not for you to make the database more performant. It's for disaster recovery. Okay, some people confuse those concepts. Multi-AZ versus replicas. Read replicas. They are very different. Okay, multi-AZ is basically for disaster recovery, and I think we've also extensively talked about disaster recovery. Right? Maintenance windows for upgrades, because you just don't want to do upgrade every time or anytime, right? So you could set aside a window that says take my upgrade around this period, right? Okay, vertical and horizontal scaling, we'll see all that. Storage is obviously backed by EBS for durability. We've seen EBS, right? So we know that behind the scene, your RDS is not just RDS. It's something that is using EC2 backed by an EBS volume. But we know all that. It's just that the nitty-gritty is taken away from us, okay? Cool. So when you look at the architecture, I just simplified it here. But one thing you need to really know about it is just the fact that there's an RDS. The most important thing from the networking perspective is that it lives in a subnet, right? And in that subnet, you need a security group. That's just basically all you need to do. So what it means is that an RDS needs a security group that grants access to it. Okay. So if that security group does not grant access to the RDS service, you can't go in. That's just the most important thing you need to take note of. So runs on a managed EC2 instance, right? Whatever is behind it, we don't really get to see it. You just interact with the service. EBS also is managed behind, we don't also get to see it. But security group is something you will control, right? Because it's you who decide who should have access, maybe from a specific IP, maybe from another EC2 machine, maybe from a VPC CIDR, whatever that is, right? And then CloudWatch, you can use CloudWatch obviously to monitor the performance of RDS. Okay, let's continue. So when you now think about the storage options that you have for RDS, right? EBS backed, obviously, that's really how things are stored. GP3, you know there was GP2. GP3 is now like the default, is the go-to, right? There's also IO2, IO1, IO2 if you wanted more, right? Automatic storage scaling, that's one of the beauty of it, because you can actually turn on automatic scaling and then your storage will grow, right? You don't have to more or less like do all that, right? So and then storage and encryption at rest, right? You can do encryption and then up to 64 terabytes storage per instance. Okay. What about the backup strategy? Obviously RDS comes up with a lot of backup strategy that we have. So automated backups is there. Manual snapshot is also there. So manual snapshot are really snapshots you take, right? So you can go there at a particular time and just take a snapshot, right, into it. And then point-in-time recovery is basically if you have automated backups, for example, you could because automated is just like it's taking it at some intervals, right? It means you can actually revert to a particular time in past. So that's why it's called point in time, right? And then cross-region backup copy, right? I think we've seen that with EBS too, but it's also good that it works with RDS, right? You can basically do cross-region copy. And then backup storage is obviously included up to 100% of the database storage, right? Obviously, you want backup to cover your existing storage. Cool. So when you now think about RDS, there's something that people, and I'll try as much as possible to simplify it here. There's the concept of read replicas, right? And read replicas is basically just something that is asynchronously replicating data from the source, right? So usually there's like a master and they have multiple read replicas. And majorly the reasons why people use read replicas is not really for high availability for the most part. It's really for you to more or less like fasten your reads, right? Because the way the RDS works is that usually you have like one writer and reader endpoint, right? So it means all your writes and your reads. Remember, I said SQL, right? So you do one of those operations is writing into the database, and another operation is reading out of the database, right? So for the most part, instead of you overloading one instance, right, doing all that, you can let that instance focus on writing, and then you can also have other instances that do reads, right, just to reduce the pressure. So what it means is that you can use it to improve read performance, right? By distributing the read load across your replicas. Okay. But take note of it. The replication there is asynchronous, right? It's not instantly. So it's asynchronous, meaning there's some lag, right? Some lag. It's not just immediately. It's something that happens behind the scene, but the data will obviously be in your read replica over time, right? But again, you can promote a read replica to become a standalone database if you wanted. You can have it in the same region or in a different region. All these things are just some of the things that you wouldn't have if you were managing your database yourself, right? But again, writing only happens from the main instance, but you can have read replicas that data is, propagated to for you to do read operations if you ever wanted to do that. Okay. So please, usually when you, especially even when you see your exams or you write an AWS exam, people usually still confuse read replicas with multi-AZ deployment, but read replicas are really for improving your read intensive applications, right? While multi-AZ is really for disaster and failover. Okay. So what's the use case? Like I said, if you had like something that is doing, so like, I have like a very simplified diagram that I have here, but I think it drives home the point. So there is like read write, you're writing it to the primary, it is asynchronously replicated to a read replica, and then you can send the read replica endpoint to like a BI team, right? So business intelligence team for them to do reporting, right? So if they wanted like a database that is not that doesn't have a lot, like they need an endpoint that doesn't have a lot of pressure, it's a good way for them to go to the read replica and fetch information instead of going to the write, because the write reader endpoint is busy. Okay. And so scaling heavy read heavy application is really why you should use it. Reporting and analytic workloads, disaster recovery, across regions, development and testing environment, right? So, and then reduce load on the primary database, which is actually the main goal, right? You can reduce the load that's going to the primary by having replicas that other applications or other users can actually talk to. Okay. Let's see. So when you now think about what is now multi-AZ, so multi-AZ is now more or less like people mix them up for read replica, but the concept is different. Okay, so a multi-AZ deployment is basically, if I say multi-AZ, it's like I have a primary in one availability zone and I have another deployment in a different AZ, right? A standby is what it's called. And here is when synchronous replication happens, right? Because the standby is just like your main, it's like your primary, right? It's just that only one can be primary at a time. And why it operates that way is that if the primary fails, right, AWS can automatically switch your standalone to become the primary. And that's why it covers AZ, right? That's why it's really for disaster recovery. So if you're having multiple AZs and one AZ goes down, that's where it's hosting your primary, because your standby is pretty much has what is in the primary. It can automatically become the primary, right? So it's needed for more or less like multi-AZ setups where disaster recovery is key for you. Okay, it's different from read replica. It's just that the standby is just there, like I mentioned, as a standby. Not really, it's not the primary. But if something goes wrong with the primary, the secondary can, in this case, the standby instance can take over. Okay, so automatic failover in case of AZ outage, like I mentioned, data is only written to the main database. Whether it's read replica, whether it's multi-AZ, data only goes through the main endpoints, right? High availability for disaster recovery. So take note, multi-AZ is for disaster recovery, if that is your use case. And then read replicas is for read sensitive application, right? So that's just the two use cases. When you have more read replicas, you're just trying to hasten your reads. But for multi-AZ, the goal is really you want to shield yourself from an AZ an availability zone going down. Okay. Failover obviously will take some time, right? It's not instantly. It will take some time to failover to another instance. Okay. So I think I've also mentioned all this. This is just giving you difference. High availability versus read scaling, synchronous versus asynchronous. For read replicas, if you ever have to do failover, it's manual. But for multi-AZ, it's automatic, right? Read access, primary only. For read replica, multiple instances, right? You can read from those read replicas, but you just can't write to them, right? So cost for multi-AZ is obviously higher, right? And then use case production workloads versus read heavy applications, okay? Sometimes people still confuse read replica, but once you understand that one is really for high availability versus read scaling, the concept just becomes very easy for you as you go. Okay. Now let's talk about Aurora. So we've talked about RDS, and then we have to finish everything before we go to the UI for relational database. But when you think about Aurora, what's Aurora? Aurora is just now AWS proprietary relational database. That's just what it means. So it means that AWS in this case is just yeah, they've come up with something they feel is, you know, it's like they took it off, they took what they have and then built something on top of it just because of the performance gain they wanted to get. Okay, right? So it's cloud optimized. It supports MySQL and PostgreSQL. They say 5x performance, right? So most people actually in the cloud right now use Aurora. That's at least for most of the experience that I have. People use Aurora instead of using just RDS, right? Because yeah, it promises more performance. 3x over PostgreSQL. So instead of you going with the PostgreSQL directly, why won't you just use Aurora with PostgreSQL that is compliant with PostgreSQL, right? Auto scaling is done for you. 20%. It's obviously more expensive, but yeah, with the promises that it's obviously faster, right? It is not available in free tier, right? So if you ever want to play with any of the relational databases service, Aurora is not free tier. You can do RDS, and you can see me mentioning RDS now and then mentioning Aurora. Because Aurora is really Aurora, right? Because it's still RDS, but sometimes it's called separately. Okay, so but it's not available for free tier. So when you think about some of the advanced features now for Aurora, yeah, auto scaling. So you don't really need to, when you provision an Aurora cluster, you don't need to specify any storage at all. It scales for you automatically, right? And in increments of 10 GB. And then up to 15 replicas. You can have the 15 up to 15 read replicas. So no matter how complex your application is, you can have 15 read replicas that are basically just answering read requests. Okay, faster failover, and then backtrack feature is there. We won't talk about backtrack, but backtrack is something. It's something that you can also use to do point-in-time recovery. Serverless support. I think we already know what serverless is, but Aurora supports serverless, meaning you can have a database that wakes up, you know, just to work, and then can go back and sleep, and then you only pay for when it's working. Yeah, Aurora is that advanced. You can do serverless application. You can use serverless with Aurora, and then there's also global database, which we're going to talk about for multi-region, right? Because you know, relational databases are RDS is basically regional service, but sometimes if you want something that is global, you can actually deploy across multiple regions. But all that you get it with Aurora. So if you now think about it, what are some of the options that are there in terms of if you were thinking about like improving your cost, right? We've seen that RDS. I think we also talked at some point about some of the options around, you know, cost management in AWS. But again, each service will give you that option for you to save cost. So RDS has its own, and the fact is that you can actually commit to 1 year, you know, 1 to 3 year for like reserve. You can reserve your RDS instances. Okay, I think we talked about reserved instances at some point. RDS is something that falls into that category. Okay, can get up to 75% savings, you know, compared to just running it on demand. So if I already know this is my database that I'm going to be using, I'm using this exact spec of database, and I'm going to use it for like an hour, for like a year, 2 years. Instead of paying the on-demand price, you can actually book it, right, and get massive savings. Okay, and then standard are obviously we know what standard is against convertible, right? Standard you can change. Convertible you can actually change. You can make some adjustments, right? And then we, yeah, regional reserved instances, zonal reserved instances. I think these are just specific details, whether you want to go AZ level or whether you want to share across AZs. But these are options you can use to basically streamline your cost for RDS. Okay. Security, obviously, as with every database, security is also core, right? So encryption at rest is supported. Encryption in transit is also supported. IAM database authentication, perfectly nice. It's something not a lot of people use, but I've used it and it's something that is very, very good. The fact that people can connect to your database without using username and password, right? You can use their IAM credential to basically gain access to your database. It's obviously advanced stuff, but it's there as an option. Okay, security groups, like I've said, is really the gateway to your RDS service, and without the right security group rule to your database, no one will get access, right? VPC obviously for network isolation. So if a database is in a VPC, only those that have access to that database can get to it. And then regular security patches and updates, AWS will do that for you. You don't have to do anything. Okay. Maintenance, we'll see as we when we start creating our instance, you see that, yeah, there's dashboard. You can see, you can monitor your usage spike, or like you can see basically metrics around your database. Okay, you can see how you're using it, if you need to scale up or if you need to pretty much scale down because you're not utilizing it. So CloudWatch metrics, alarms, performance insight if you really wanted to drill down to see how your queries are performing, and then enhanced monitoring, right, for detailed metrics if you wanted it more at a shorter intervals. Okay. Yeah, cost optimization. These are just strategies that I'm mentioning here. So reserved instances, if your workload is predictable, you already know it, right? And then you can right-size instances based on usage patterns, right? What it means is that you can choose an instance right now, and after a while, if you feel that the instance is too big, you can downsize, right? Use Aurora serverless for variable workloads. It's there. We're just not going to talk about it in advance, but just know that if you wanted something where you're only using the database for just an hour, right, and for the rest days, it's not doing it. For the rest hour, it's not doing anything. You can use a serverless in that case, right? Just utilize it for the 1 hour and let it go down. Whenever you need it again, it comes up, right? And then implement proper backup retention policies, right? So you have to make sure that backup is going on well, and then monitor and optimize storage usage, and then use multi-AZ only when high availability is needed. Like I mentioned, it's really why you should use multi-AZ. Okay. So let's now look at the common database architecture that is there. So single AZ is single AZ, right? You know what it means? Meaning you just created the database, it's just in one availability zone. That's it. Multi-AZ for production. So if you were testing in your environment, it's fine for you to have it in just one availability zone and ignore the rest. But for a production setup, nobody's going to use one AZ. It has to be multi-AZ, right? And then you can use read replicas for read-heavy applications. Global database if you wanted to keep multi-region kind of a setup, like multi-region setup, right? Serverless if you had like a variable workload, like I think we've already seen like variable every time we talk about it, right? But if you feel your workload is like variable, sometimes it's not even being used, and sometimes you use them. Serverless can work in that place, in that kind of scenario. And then obviously hybrid is still a thing. You can have hybrid for on-premise and cloud database, right? So you can pretty much have like a database that's in the cloud and then connect from your on-premise system. Okay. At some point, you get to learn how you can connect from your on-premise to AWS. So you can have your infrastructure in AWS and still connect from your on-premise. Similarly, you can have a database that is in the cloud that you can connect with from your on-premise environment, right? So before we talk about the summary, let's just go into my accounts. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm just going to go to RDS here, and then I'll go to RDS. Let me zoom in a bit so that my screen is you can see it. So it's here. I don't have any instance, right? Provision, right? But I can go ahead and go to my DB instance and I can create a database. Okay. There's an easy create option. There is also a standard create option, but you can see it already defaults to Aurora, Postgres, SQL compatible, right? So what I'm just going to do is that first of all, I'm just going to look at the options that I need if I wanted to go the Aurora route, and then compare it with what I'm going to get if I was just to do MySQL or Postgres, right? So for example, if I go here for Aurora, you can see it gives me like a version, right? So like I said, your database, if you already have a database outside and you're coming to the cloud, you basically will choose a version that is compatible with what you already have or what you're trying to deploy in the cloud, right? And then you can choose what kind of templates you want to use. You want to use dev test, or deployment or production. Usually, I mean, most people will not create, like if you're learning, you'll do this in the UI, but most times infrastructure as code will do this for you, right? So I don't think in infrastructure as code, there's like a template where you can say dev test or production. You have to specify exactly what you want to deploy, okay? But again, here you can put the identifier, for example, and then let's not worry about whether it's optimized or like it's Aurora standard, but these things, they come to play at some point, because depending on which one you choose, depending on how your application works, one might be cheaper than the other, right? Because it just depends. If your application is really IO optimized, but again, that's when you need to think if that's that kind of application is more suited for Aurora, or instead of something like DynamoDB or even key spaces. Okay, but you can also choose like an IO optimized, or you can choose standard. So I'm not going to go into it, but yeah, this is the option where we say serverless, right? If you wanted to more or less like just use serverless, it comes on, does this thing, it goes back to sleep. But again, we could do memory of. Let's actually look for bustable classes, right? So the T classes. And then you can choose one, right? And this is where you can choose all the options you want. You can do multi-AZ deployment, and we already know what a multi-AZ deployment is at this point, right? But you can say don't create an Aurora replica, or you can say create an Aurora replica and read node in a different AZ, right? So recommended for scaled availability. So you can choose multi-AZ. Here, don't connect to an EC2 compute resource, connect. And then you can obviously choose your VPC stack, choose your public access if you wanted it accessible publicly or not. VPC security group, like I said, that's like one thing you need to take note of. You must have a VPC security group that allows traffic to it, right? There will be like a certificate, okay? Because like I said, there is encryption in transit, encryption at rest. So all that is what you make do with from a certificate, and then you can choose your database port, right? Turn on local for this. Yeah, there's room for IAM authentication. I just mentioned it, right? And then you can also do database like insights, whether you want advanced or you want standard. There's so many options here. So I'm just trying to show you all some of the things that are mentioned in this slide. But the actual example we're going to use is RDS. I'm just showing you for Aurora, right? So retention days, for example, if you have your data, how long you want to retain them, which KMS key are you going to be using for your encryption, enhanced monitoring, if you wanted, and then if you wanted to export the logs, right? I think there's DevOps Guru here. It gives you your price, right? It tells you how much it's going to cost you, and that's why I said Aurora is really not free tier. Okay, it's not something you should practice with if you're just trying to test your play with your free tier account. So instead of doing Aurora, I'm just going to go to MySQL, right? Because here now, when I choose MySQL, I've switched from Aurora. These are the two Aurora. I've switched from Aurora to RDS basically. So here I'm going to do MySQL. I'm just going to choose any of the versions, right? It looks like 8.4.0. Let's see. I think this looks like the latest. I can use free tier, like I mentioned. That's the one that has the free tier option. So you can see all these things are grayed out now because I've chosen the free tier, right? So just single lazy, and you can see it the way it is. Reader, there's like writer, reader endpoint. You have this, and then when you look at the option for multi-AZ, you have one read and then one standby, and then here you just have one primary instance, right? But it's similar to everything we've talked about. And then you can go to more or less like here and create. This is the username, admin in this case. The password if you wanted to manage yours, or you wanted AWS to manage one for you. For me, I would say I want to manage my own, right? But security best practice, at some point you learn how to use like secret manager for you to manage your secret. I'm just going to paste in a password here. Okay, I'm just going to type it so that okay, so I have a password. Not sure what happened there, but I do have a password now. And then, yeah, this is where it chooses an instance for you, right? So it goes here for what is free. You can go to DBT3 micro, right? So I have that one that I can choose from. Storage, this is where, yeah, you can choose. Because for RDS, like I said, for RDS, you're basically, you can, if you check the Aurora option, we didn't really see room for us to choose any of the storage, right? Because, yeah, Aurora is obviously, a lot of things are managed for you, and they're using like the best practice. But here you have to choose. You can choose whatever you want to use, right? So GP2, GP3, and we've looked at these things at some point, but you can choose any of them. So here I can go to GP3 or GP2. I will use GP3, and then there's like a minimum of 20 GB, but it's fine because that will be covered under free tier. Comes to the default 3000 IOPS, 1 to 5, blah blah blah. Enable auto scaling. Yeah, this is like what I mentioned, right? RDS has room for you to have like your storage grow automatically. Okay, so you can enable auto scaling for your storage to grow. Um, um, you can only set up a connection to a compute resource later, or set up a connection to an EC2 compute resource for this database. I really don't want to use this option. I can go with the IPv4. Default VPC. Right now, we don't really have any of the VPCs set up just yet. Okay, so I'll use the default. No public access, meaning no one from the internet or anywhere can access. Security group. I'm just going to go with the default, right? So availability zone. Like I said, I'll just choose. Maybe I'll just choose one. RDS proxy is a different conversation entirely. We're not going to talk about it. But database port is here. Password authentication is what I want. Like I said, there is IAM authentication, which is important at some point. But for now, let's just let it be. Database insights is standard. All these logs are logs you can have. There's even slow query logs. I think these things are not new for someone who's already a DBA person, but all these you can get it from the cloud, right? Just by configuring things, right? So you can do additional configuration if you wanted, but I won't do that. So I'm just going to create my database. Let's go to databases. So MySQL is creating. Let's close this one. So it's creating. We just need to give it time to create. So when you click on your instance, remember we're just creating one instance, right? So if you go to let's see, configuration, for example, you can have an idea of the things you did specify, right, to bring up the database. The engine is here, the password is here, maximum is obviously 1000 GB, right? So 1 TB of storage. Yeah, and then we'll just give it some time to come up. Just so you know, RDS is really RDS, like I mentioned. So while that one is creating, like I mentioned, if you go to any of the other instances, if you go back to databases now, and I want to create a new one, I think the most important thing you need to understand is that, yeah, these are the relational databases that AWS supports, right? But again, for the most part, yeah, you can't have. I think it's going to be tricky. I don't know how easy it is for you to see a company that uses all of them, right? And this is why I also tell people about how you approach the cloud, right? And because not all companies are going to be using these databases that we're seeing. So I can't tell you you should go and learn Oracle, learn MariaDB, or learn MySQL. No, it's basically you, a cloud person. You're basically your role is for you to understand what is the best database for a particular use case. That's number one. Knowing the limitations, knowing things about how expensive it will be for you to use this database against this other database. But a lot of the things too comes in the form of more study, more hands-on, more research, right? Because for the most part, if you're working in a company, for example, not all companies will use all these databases at once, right? Your company may just be using Aurora, MySQL. Some people will just be using, MySQL and Postgres. Some people pretty much maybe they're only using MariaDB, right? So it's not expected that you really need to know the databases themselves in depth, okay? Like go into each one because you are more or less like there's so many things you'll be dealing with. Database is just one of it. So I'll show you what the role of a cloud engineer is. Your role is not really for you to, be tuning. That's why you have like database engineer. There's like role for DBAs, right? People have people who do databases in an ideal world, though. But our database is still creating. Let me see. It's still creating. It's going to take some time. But one thing you need to take note of is that the monitoring tab is really some of the places you are going to be playing. It's still not up yet, but I'll show you what the monitoring tab looks like because that's where you most of our role falls into, right? You monitor if something goes wrong, if someone gains unauthorized access into the DB, that's where you depend on the logs. You could have events that notifies you immediately when that happens, right? Instead of you being retroactive, like going back to check the logs, you could have something that is watching those logs and informs you immediately when it happens, right? Um, but for the most part, you are really the person. Our role is configuration, management, making sure you're patching them. If there's like something, if you're using a particular version of MySQL, for example, and that version is no longer supported from AWS, it's your role to do more or less like upgrade, right? Upgrade to a new version, and you need to understand the process that it takes to upgrade without downtime, right? So there's a lot that you'll be doing in your role where you won't be necessarily writing SQL queries or being inside the database and searching things, right? But if you have that database experience, it's awesome. Like if you already had worked in the past with something around databases, it's good. I won't say it's not nice, but I'm just saying it's not going to be the core of what you'll be doing. It's just what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's going to take some time to create. Status is saying it's backing up. CPU is already telling us 47%. So it means, yeah, it looks like at least there's some metrics already being reported, right? I don't know. Yeah, but if we go back to, it's just going to take some time to set up. But while it's there, let me just look at some of the things that we can do. So right now, many of the options are empty. But one thing that is important that you need to see is like you can take a snapshot, right? And when you click on take a snapshot, that's a manual snapshot, right? That's you manually taking a snapshot. So it's different from automated snapshot. Automated snapshot are things that happens automated, like over like you set a schedule and they happen maybe like every 1 hour or every 2 hours, right? But you can also take a snapshot and you can take a physical snapshot for yourself. And I think if you look at that snapshot, it's similar to how EBS works because you can take that snapshot and copy it over to a different place. And then you can use that to bring up a new database from the snapshot. Just similar to how we've seen EBS work, right? Good. So these concepts are similar, just that let me go back to databases. There is one, it says backing up, but let's click on the database and see. So one thing you should take note of is that there's already an endpoint. So if I wanted to connect to this database right now, this is the endpoint I'm going to use. This is the port I'm going to use. When you saw, I gave it a username and a password. So someone who already knows database knows that's basic stuff. You basically connect to application developers in this case will connect to the database, do their thing, right? For some of us, we do beyond that, because when you have like an endpoint like this, there are other things you are doing outside people just connecting and using the database. There is more that goes behind the scene. But for the most part, people just want a database endpoint that is working, that is live to connect to, right? And then our responsibility is basically making sure that environment is secure. The security groups are tight. People can just gain access to it, right? So those are some of the things you need to know. I'm just saying all these things while we are waiting for it to come up. Especially, I want to show you what the monitoring tab looks like. Now you can see now we have like some monitoring, right? Before it was empty, but you can see. So ideally, this is really where you pay attention to, right? Because you can see the CPU utilization. So if you had like a database that you deployed over time, you can actually see how much it is using CPU, and that could be a good indication to know if you have to vertically scale down the database or scale it up, right? But there's also room where you can see like database connections. You can see how many people are actually, how many clients are connecting to the database, right? This is some of the things we manage, or this is some of the things we own, right? So there are many more things here that probably I'm not going to talk about, but you can also see free storage space. Remember, for RDS, we did specify, like a storage, and then we said auto scale, right? But you can actually see how you're using storage. Here, we specify 20 GB. Obviously, our 20 GB is still free. We've not used it at all, okay? Yeah, so many things you can see from there. For logs, right now, we didn't really specify any logs, right? These are all just events to bringing up the database. But if you had logs, that's where you can actually go in there. So you can see, for example, error logs. This is obviously going to take you to CloudWatch, okay? So if you go here, it's going to take you to CloudWatch. It tells you some of the things that happened when trying to bring up the database. Yeah, those are all just logs related to the database, right? What else do we need to see? So configuration wise, this is where you see at a glance the configuration you have in place that is working for you. Zero ETL, we don't need to talk about that. Maintenance and backup is something that is important. Right now, maintenance is enabled. What does maintenance mean? It just means there's like a window at which, like if there was like a new upgrade that needs to happen to your RDS instance, it's going to happen around this time, right? So that's basically what you need to know. And if there is like a maintenance ongoing, you see it here. From pending, it's going to take effect. But again, you can have your own backups, right? You can have your own backups. You can also take snapshot if you wanted. And we've seen many reasons why you want to do that, right? You can take snapshot for many reasons. Just whether you want to keep a copy or you want to open your database maybe in a different region. If you wanted, take it, you share it, and then use it there, just the way we did for ABS, right? Recommendations, you can see some recommendations around your tags. We didn't really specify any tags, but you know what that is. Tag is good because for all resources in AWS, nobody enforces you to put in tags, but they are good for you to more or less like organize your resources. Sometimes you want to filter how much is it costing dev to use this RDS, or how much is it costing us in prod, or how much is this department using. So it just depends on your tagging strategy. Some of those things that some of the things that is mentioned here. What else do I want to show you? So let's look at the actions. You can basically modify, like I mentioned, because it's a database. It's a database for the most part. It means that you can vertically scale. Okay, you can scale up and you can scale down because it's a relational database. Number one, it's not. We'll see other flavors of database, but regardless whether it's Postgres, MySQL, you can always go back. Like I said, you were looking at the CPU utilization, you realize that, oh, you're not really using it as much as you want. Why not? You can go and use a bigger instance, for example, that has 2 V CPU, 2 GB RAM, right? You can also scroll down to like using something that has 8 V CPUs and 32 GB RAM, right? So, but remember, this is vertical scaling. It's basically, you're still talking about the main, the more or less like the primary instance here. It has nothing to do with like your read replicas, right? Your read replicas are really those endpoints that you're going to be exposing for people to make reads. So that's different. But you can actually scale your main EC2 instance, your main RDS instance. You can scale it up, okay? So you can go back and modify. You can, change your storage. You can do many things here, okay? What else do I want to show you as part of the options? What else do I want to show you? Let me see here. Yeah, let's look at the actions. So some of these actions that are now here, but again, you can actually create a read replica. So that's something you should know that is different from, so you can create a read replica of the primary instance. And a read replica is going to be more or less like isolated, like it's different. It's just that the sync happens, the replication happens asynchronously, but it's a different instance, right? And people can actually connect directly to your read replica. So you can go there, yeah, this is also where you can specify the more or less like the instant, whatever the capacity of the replica itself. And that's why I said when you were trying to modify the instance, the database, and you're trying to scale vertically up or down, it doesn't affect the read replica. You can scale the replica in isolation from the primary instance. Okay. Um, you can choose, yeah, it's pretty much, it's still RDS, right? You can also, the same configuration you had for your primary instance, you can have it here, right? You still can do all that. So you can do single AZ for a read replica. More or less like the same setting we went through. So let's go back. We won't do that now. But if you also go here, you can, what else do I want to show you? Yeah, you can obviously convert to a multi-AZ setup. What is a multi-AZ? Right now, if you go and check your instance, if you check your instance, let me see if I can, where is it now? Let's go back here. Let's see. Yeah, you can see this particular instance is running in US West 2A, right? So right now it's just one AZ, right? But you can actually more or less like set up, like create, convert to a multi-AZ deployment. And then you have two instances, one in one AZ, the other in the second AZ. And the most important thing there is just so that you know right now we're in one AZ. So if that AZ is impacted, your database is impacted. But you could also have a multi-AZ setup where one AZ is impacted and the other is not impacted, right? I mentioned restoring to a point in time as part of the class. It's an option that RDS gives you. You can basically go back to, like how, depending on how much, what do you call it, how much backups you have taken over time, you can actually restore to a particular time, right? That is supported. And then you can now provide a set of configuration again for that database to come up, okay? Yeah. What else? I think that's pretty much it at this level, honestly, because yeah, for the most part, I think we will take this further when we start creating probably like you want to create like a small setup, create an endpoint. But for the most part, once you have a database set up, and the person has this endpoint, they have the ports, the IP. I think the next thing is just to connect with the username and the password, and that's not new for somebody who already understands database. Okay, and that is also not what you should be interested in. It's not your core area. But even if you already know what to do with it, I mean, you can connect to your endpoint, give it the same port, give it the username and the password, create a database, create tables, do all the read operations that you want to do, try your data, but it's not a database class. Here we are really at the infra level, right? We're talking about what it takes for you to deploy a relational database in the AWS platform, okay? And I think yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell, okay? And we'll just summarize. So RDS really provides managed relational database. We've seen all the engines that are supported. It also offers offers cloud optimized performance, Aurora in this case, right? Because when you saw Aurora, you saw that we didn't really need to specify. We didn't need to specify the storage and give it like a storage, for RDS we have to specify like an EBS volume. We have to choose, how powerful we wanted the EBS volume to be. But for Aurora, all that is taken away from us, right? So multi-AZ provides high availability. I mentioned that. Please don't forget. Read replicas is really for scaling your read applications. Proper backup and security are essential. I think I didn't really show you. I'm not sure if we looked at it, but if you scroll down, yeah, obviously there's like a certificate that is already given to it. But if you see, not sure where. I don't know if we configured something around the keys that we were using. Let me see configuration. I know we are not using IMDB authentication. I don't know it's enabled, but we didn't really, like I mentioned, IMDB authentication is basically if you didn't want to use username and password and you just wanted to use IAM credentials already, okay? But this KMS key is important. KMS key is important. This is where your encryption happens. You can see encrypted is enabled, right? So ideally, you shouldn't set up a database that doesn't have encryption enabled, because remember, there is a storage behind the database. So what it's just saying is that your data is stored encrypted, right? And then there's like a KMS key that is being used to do that. Cool. I just wanted to go back to making you see that part in the document. So proper backup and security is there. Whether you want it, ideally automated backup is the way to go, right? But sometimes people just take manual snapshot for their own, for whatever reason you want to use it to do. And then cost optimization obviously requires planning. So I think I can show you that for free now. So for example, if I know this instance, for example, that I know T3 micro is the instance that I'm using, but I can actually go to RDS and say I want a reserved DB instance because I've used it for like a year. And I see that, this is the database I'm going to be using for the next 1 year. There's no point. So instead of me paying on-demand price, I can go here, right, and choose an engine and say, right now I'm using MySQL, right? So let's just give it time for it to load, right? But I can go in there and choose more or less like the engine that I want to support. In this case, RDS MySQL, I can choose my instance type. If I was using this instance, I would say this. It's a single lazy in my own case right now, right? And I can go here and we've seen the purchase time before now, 1 year, 3 years, and all. I can go choose 1 year. I can say no upfront, meaning I'm not willing to pay a dime just to have this, but I'll still get some benefit because here it's just like you're taking a long-term commitment, saying I'm going to be using this database for the next 1 year, and you're going to get more savings. And then you can choose many, right? the amount of DB instances you want. Right now, we're only looking at one, but if you have like read replicas, maybe you're using like 5 read replicas, maybe one primary, maybe one AZ standby instance, that's like 7, right? So instead of paying the on-demand price, you can just basically come here and say, I know all my instances use the same capacity, I need 7, right? And then you do next, for example. And then, you just purchase. You're not doing any upfront payment, right? But you can also do partial payment, and you can even do full upfront. And that full upfront is what gives you the maximum savings if you ever wanted, right? So it's good, to tell you your time start date and when it's going to end. Some of these details I'm just giving you so that it won't just be like theory, but they are there. You can basically, it's one way you can optimize your RDS cost if eventually you have your RDS running for you. Okay, so yeah, that's it. So under cost optimization and planning, that's really what you need to do. What else? I think that's it. That's really what I wanted to share. But